On this Saturday, wherein I think we are in a, I don't know, mixture of, on a very great day of starting of Navaratri as well today. Of course, this year has been slightly different, but then, yeah, I'm sure the festivities will be still going on, whether it's at home or whether it's from outside. So, yeah. Oh.
Yes, doctor, you can start.
Hello.
Yes, doctor, you can start.
So I think, today's topic, of course, is about senior citizens and caregivers, and of course, how they can sort of help each other. So I would say, so as I was saying that, so the relationships between, first of all, I think it's very important that we understand that, most of you already do that we are, every man, woman is a social animal. So how much ever you can say that you're independent, you can do everything yourself, you still need company. The company could be of any form. Of course, always comes first is, you would say, your family. Then comes your inner circle, which could be your friends. Then your various relationships, which you actually have throughout your life, whether it is in your office, whether it is with the milkman who comes, whether it's your grocery person. So small relationships that you actually, so all matter because they give you something or the other throughout as you go ahead. But I think one of the most important relationships that matters is the older adult and the sort of the caregiver. Now the caregiver could be anybody. It could be the husband or the wife. In that case, of course, that particular person itself will be old. So usually that companionship would have actually happened for some time, and they would have grown old together. They would have had lot of memories, lot of instances which they would have had throughout their life. Then of course it is the immediate family. It could be the son, it could be the daughter, it could be brothers, sisters. Now there is something known as primary caregiver. Usually in most cases, the primary caregiver is always the wife or the husband. Or of course, if for some reason unfortunately they are obviously there has been bereavement and there is a death, so it could be your children. And then of course in certain cases, uh, certain older adults remain to stay single, which is obviously their choice. So then could be their relatives, it could be it could be their nephew, it could be their niece. So it's a lot of things, and the more simple it becomes, the more better it is. The more complicated the thoughts are, the more complex it becomes. So it's always about, people say it's about expectations, it's about what they will do, it's about what you will do. So ultimately, always, if you see the psychology, everybody wants to be pampered, everybody wants to be kept good, but everybody has their own lives. Like you have taken care of your children from a very young age, you have nurtured them, and they would do the same if they obviously respect you. And I'm sure that the parents don't just because you have done, that's why they should do. That's not the expectation. The word is expectation. The reason being, a lot of times it is said, the more you expect, the more you might actually get hurt if the expectations are not fulfilled. But that's not the point. Ultimately, you have expectations from people that you care about, and those things also matter. But I would say that ultimately, from both sides, there is always has to be a movement from both sides. It is, and you have to meet somewhere in between, because ultimately it is never that one is right, one is wrong. Because one side, you have your experience, you have seen life, you have undergone a lot of things, you have taken decisions, you have helped people in decisions. Whereas on the other side is the younger person who, or it could be your own wife or this. I would try to focus first on the young and the old, and then of course go to the same age or the same sort of age group. So and the other side it could be more that they are actually having their own lives, as you all understand, because you have obviously undergone the same. They have their children, they have their family, they have sort of their overall smaller family in which they take care, whether it's their children, whether it's their wife, but it's ultimately all taking care of each other and together. So what is to be understood always is that both sides have to be understood, and it has to be a midway. So you cannot say that only the youngsters should take two steps forward and the older adults should just think no, whatever we do is right or wrong. No, even the older adults should take two steps forward, and then ultimately there has to be somewhere in the midline. And most older adults do that as well, because they understand, and as they go older they also understand the fact that they have their own lives as well. So they want to be independent. They have their lives because they have the time, more time on their hands, so they want to do what they do. But at the same time, they have this fear that no, what if we get sick, what if we get thing, then we will become a burden on the caregiver. So I don't think that is something you should think, because ultimately when you took care of them when they were young, even they would do the same, not because of respect but because they actually love you. So never think that because you are not independent, because you're not able to do something, you obviously sort of become a burden. So that is one of the most important things as far as from the older adult side is concerned. Now, as far as a caregiver is concerned, I would always say that it depends on what they are taking care of, because a lot of times it could be just calling, it could be just talking, because they are not there in the living in the same place. If you are of course living in the same place, it could be involved in more major roles, like maybe the financial part as well, the food part as well to a great extent, and of course everybody does that. And in a lot of cases, if they are not staying together, then them facilitating the same, that is facilitating having a paid caregiver to actually take care of the older adult. Now, as a caregiver, it is also very important that you understand what the older adults' diseases are, the older adults' problems are, because that is when you can actually take care of them. Another thing is never be too harsh on you or the older adult. If the older adult has some issues, that is the reason why they might be, or they might actually be behaving in a certain way. So you have to be try to be really patient as far as older adults is concerned. Then caregiving is also something which to a great extent uh, is also about patience, because ultimately a lot of times you might be taking too much stress that I have to do this also, I have to do that also, I don't have time for myself. So that also can happen with a caregiver. This is where things like support groups for caregivers, wherein they are able to express what they feel, they're able to take tips from other people taking care of older adults, that is what also becomes sort of important. So the caregiver should remember one thing, that they have to take care of themselves to basically take better care of their kin or the older adults or the people they are caring for. So that is, I think, very important. You cannot forget the fact that you have to be fit enough to take care of your kin as well. Then knowledge also helps. Knowledge of caregiving helps. For one disease you might be have to do caregiving in one type. For another disease you might have to do it in a different way. Then I think it's all about adjustment. Sometimes the older adult might not improve, and you have to adjust to the disease and try to help them out in that way. A lot of times caregivers will not get complete recognition, and purely because for example, if it is a person with actually having memory loss and dementia, so that you keep caring for that particular person, you might just have small sparks wherein, or small instances wherein that person might respond and that might recognize, but overall that might not happen. And so the caregiver should never have that particular disappointment that in spite of doing all this I could not sort of get over. So most of the times the caregivers to an extent also have guilt. Now what is important is, this is of course the young and the old. Now a lot of times caregivers can be senior citizens as well. So for example, an older adult who's 75, who's 80, 85, might be taken care by the spouse or the husband, who themselves is around 70, 80 in the same age group as well. So in that case, there is very, very easy that that particular person who's caring for the older adult might just forget themselves. So that is something which should never happen. uh, your particular health should also be taken care of, because ultimately you are also old. So we keep saying there's always a patient behind the patient. So never sort of forget the caregiver, because the more stressed the caregiver is, the more difficulties they have. And a lot of times the caregiver don't express it directly, because they feel that no, that is something they are doing out of will, and they have to do it anyways, not because they have been forced to do it or because they don't have any choice. In this case, of course, for such older adults, help from their kin, that is the younger kin, that is their children, their relatives, always helps, especially in taking care in person. And also sometimes one has to be practical and maybe employ paid caregivers, purely because that this particular caregiver also needs a break. And by a break, I mean proper break, wherein they are actually taking care of themselves, they have their sleep, they have everything. So ultimately that aspect, I think, is very, very important. Now, as far as the overall mental aspect of a relationship between an older adult and their caregiver is that they have to help each other. Now, the reason is because if there is an impulse and if there is obviously a breakdown, then it doesn't, let me be frank, it doesn't help either side. Because the older adult will keep suffering and will keep thinking that my own children or my own kin is not in touch with me, they don't take care of me. And at the same time, the more the time goes ahead, the younger people also tend to not contact, purely because of sometimes guilt, that is it the right time to call now, I have not spoken. So that's why they say ultimately most important thing I feel in any relationship in general, and of course in caregiving and their older adult, I think, is communication. A lot of times that communication does not happen, and people just, I mean, on either side, we just think things have happened, and then we just tend to take them forward. So I think that is something also which is important. So one has to communicate, try to communicate all your feelings. I'm not saying that it's always it's always a sort of an issue. If you don't communicate, it becomes a problem. Now another thing is, I would say, is life is quite short in general. I mean, you might say that yeah, around 80 years, 90 years, 100, but in general, I mean, life just goes, you don't know time. I mean, we were talking about March when this particular COVID started. We are already into, I mean, Navratri. I mean, we didn't even know that so much months are gone, and between 3 months even the year will end. And I mean, and a lot of things have happened, but there are some constants which usually happen. So their constant includes our family, it includes our friends. So I would say there is no use being very angry on either side, because anger only sort of keeps you away from yourself, it keeps you away from your kin, and vice versa. So when the anger builds up, then you don't want to forgive. If you don't want to forgive, then it just continues that way, and then life just goes. And then one fine day, I mean, ultimately everybody knows that life will end. So are you, I mean, the question you want to ask yourself is this is how you want to sort of end your life, wherein you couldn't even express the fact that you were angry at someone else, and they also couldn't express the same, and you just couldn't forgive each other. So that's what they say. Ultimately, you might not forget the bad times, that's okay, but sometimes forgiving people only helps you getting a sense of gratitude. It helps you sort of, sometimes when you forgive somebody, it is for yourself, it is not for the other person, because just being angry doesn't really help. And same could be from the caregiver's part. Now a lot of times upbringing matters. So the younger person, if the younger person for whatever reason has had a very strict childhood wherein their parents have been very strict, they were not allowing to do this, do that, so that keeping that in mind and judging and keeping the same yardstick when they get old also will not help, because ultimately time is going. We have to always remember time just flies. I mean, no better for people to actually talk about time than all the older adults here, because they have seen so many, but then the time has actually flown. Like yesterday you were in your maybe in your childhood, but now you are well into your adulthood and you are older. You have seen people leave, you have seen people die, you have seen more and more people coming into this life, whether it's children, grandchildren, friends dying, more friends making, younger people meeting more people. So as they say, life is obviously full of experiences, and you don't want that with your own kin. You want an experience of anger and disappointment to just keep lingering on, and then that not sort of ultimately settling. Then another important thing is the guilt factor. Like a lot of times, I'm telling you, when children they live abroad, they tend to end up getting guilt, because it's not that they are not there for you because they don't want to. Of course, maybe job opportunities, then actually earning a livelihood, education, all these things drive, and then those are things obviously you have encouraged them to do. It's not that it would always be a joint decision. And but somewhere or the other, they do, even if they don't express it openly, they will have that guilt that they were not there for you always. So from the caregiver's perspective also, I think guilt is not good. You should always try to do whatever best you can, because ultimately, I mean, that's what sort of matters, whether it's taking care of the bills, whether it's making sure that the best health facilities are provided when you're not there, because ultimately these things matter. Just being guilty forever that I was not able to do this or I was not able to do that doesn't help, because unfortunately life has to sort of go on, and you need to have more and more experiences and more pleasant experience. And same is with the older adult. Guilt as a senior citizen should also be not there, that oh, in childhood I was too strict, or maybe I must have done something wrong, that is why sort of the connection has broken down. So I think the key always is, instead of just thinking and extrapolating things, we should always try to have conversations. We should always try to have communications. And don't think that if you do the communication first, that you become small or anything. No, I don't think older adults think that way at all. And same is with younger people. Younger people sometimes just, it's not that they are egoistic, it's just that they are like, should they, I mean, is this mendable, can things get better at all? Sometimes thinking that itself, some 5 to 10 years go away. So that's not how it should be. So communication, I think, is always the key from either side. And as I said earlier, try to take steps from either side. It will never be only the older adult who's coming forward or doing things, or it's the younger person who's coming forward or doing things. So ultimately, for both, even for the caregiver and for the older adult, having a very good understanding and a relationship really matters, because ultimately these are all people who care about each other. And sometimes time and communication creates confusions, creates distances, and it is the responsibility of both to actually overcome sort of the same. And it is, you will say that sometimes this particular paradigm becomes complicated. Yes, sometimes things cannot be mended, sometimes things cannot be so, but if that is the way, then maybe that is the way it has to be. But we should never think in your life that we didn't try enough, because ultimately that is what matters. You can only try from either side. And if there is a midway which is reached, then of course it is always going to be mutually good for both sides. So thanks a lot for your patient hearing. I think it was more of, I would say, a very sort of a topic which is concerning, I think, both older adults and their caregivers, and it can also sort of rekindle a lot of emotions. So thank you. Thanks for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Doctor. If anybody wants to ask Doctor any questions, unmute yourself, ask the question, and again mute yourself.
Yeah, doctor, both these conditions uh, dementia and Parkinsonism are quite serious conditions. And the member at home might find it really difficult to manage, though he or she loves the person concerned. In which case, I feel that to some extent, we should take the help of the caregiver.
Yeah, sir, I totally agree with you. That's why they say ultimately, as a caregiver, also you have limitations. Just because you are not doing it for that particular person doesn't mean you don't love the person. Because you are making sure that a proper person comes who is more adept at taking care of that person, that is the best way to go about. And at least you can still continue to love the person the same way, rather than you trying to take care of the person getting frustrated because you are not an expert of taking care of the person. Because so that shouldn't happen. Ultimately then that will come in between the love. So yeah, no, I feel paid caregiver and also people who can help out should always be reached out for. And that is another reason this topic was selected today, that caregivers should know their limitations, seek help when needed, and that doesn't reduce the amount of love or the affection or the sort of understanding that you have for your kin. So no, the point well taken, and it is very true. Such conditions can be very difficult to handle on your own. You need help.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Doctor. May I ask a question?
Just 1 minute. Just
Oh.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Just give doctor a minute. He's on the phone.
Sorry. Yeah.
Uh, I think the person who was asking a question, is the person still there? I can't see a person. Yeah, she's there. You are on mute, ma'am.
Can I be heard now?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah. Tell me.
Now the question is, this is in continuation for last night. I had asked you a question about one family member who is having memory loss. Now the same person very recently now has gone much worse in spite of the medications that she has been prescribed for, because she forgets that also. So the family is taking care in every possible way. Now the youngsters are professionals, so they always have a 24 hours person to take care of this senior person.
Yeah.
Now the senior person has come to a stage where her fluctuations can be very considerable from day to day. And then she recently refused to have a 24 hours person in her house to take care of her. She just said, no, I don't want you to enter the kitchen. I do not want you to take bath in my house. You go somewhere else. Or you go down to my daughter's house and stay there. But I don't want you in my house. Then the daughter had to bring her down to her own house, where there is no place in a flats like Bombay. Now, in such cases, and at the same time, considering the dementia, the senior citizen also cannot be blamed, but at the same time, it's a dilemma for the caregivers. What do we do in such cases?
Ma'am, it's a quite a difficult thing, because ultimately you have to know how, I mean, you have to know the current status of that particular older person, whether any sort of medications can actually help them to cool down a bit, because behavioral impairment can occur in a lot of, I mean, memory impairments as well. And a lot of times fighting it out is almost impossible, because
That's
you're not, yeah, so you're not fighting with a person who actually is thinking the right way. So in that way, a lot of times, of course, certain medications are given for the behavioral part, which are taken care of, and then obviously such things are handled, because it becomes very difficult if the current disease is like this, and then they become very angry, because ultimately what is important is you still want to take care of that particular person, one. And two, of course, in a lot of places in India, it's still coming up. In a lot of in abroad, usually what happens is then at one point of time, the kin obviously has to take a decision, and then they have to put them in care homes. Now, by care homes, I mean they're specific for dementia. I'm not saying they have been shunned. Let me be very frank. When there have been older people who have become a problem for their own life, for example, people who go to the kitchen and just put on the gas and forget about it. And
Exactly. This is what has
yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they have actually responded very well when they go to a care home. Those care homes are not a lot in India as such yet, specifically for dementia. But I'm just saying, ultimately, what happens is, as a caregiver, you need to know your limitations. You can only handle to a certain extent. In this particular case, as I told you, of course, if there are significant behavioral impairments, then we need to take care of the behavioral impairments and then try again with the caregiver. If still not, then in that case, of course, we'll have to obviously take a call wherein the kin themselves will have to take care. I know it's going to be very difficult, but then it becomes that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you suggest that again consultation with a neurophysician for a behavioral change may help.
Yeah, neurophysician, yeah, geriatrician, whatever whoever you're following up, you should sort of, so that at least you tell them that there has been a behavioral change, and if needed, it can be obviously tapered down with medications, and then depending on that, try to adjust.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I think we can only take one last question if anybody has any questions. So if there are no questions, thank you very much, Doctor, for your session. It's been very useful. I think we're going to be doing one more of this after maybe a month. I think the relationship between a caregiver and the elder is a very, very, very important relationship. And I think we need to do one more, which we will get back to all of you. However, in the meantime, just to remind all of you, a recording of this will be on our website in case you want to watch this or any other session by Dr. Prem. All of them are there on my website. Do have a look at www.taaresocial.com. Until then, we'll see you guys next week. Thank you very much, Doctor, once again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor.